Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to wait for some more people to filter into the Zoom and then into the room. But if you're on Zoom, feel free to type in the chat where you are signing in from. We are currently joined by a few different members of our staff. We're here with Chris Westcott, with Lucy Parker. Sarah Getz is here as well. And everyone is just working together to ensure that we all have a great hybrid experience. We have folks here from Utah, from Mexico, and from Boston. And we're out here in San Francisco. All right, we'll just give it a couple more minutes, after which I will be introducing some upcoming programming that we have going on at the archive. And then I will hand it over to our publishing team to take it away with the Salon. Chris, would you mind making it full screen on your laptop, just so the screen's a little bigger? Yeah. Looks good. Okay, so again, welcome to our first Salon of 2024. This is also our first hybrid Salon of the year, which is very exciting. We have folks here on Zoom, folks here in person. And yeah, we'll just kind of wait for people to filter in, but I think we'll just get started. And I'll start by introducing some of our programming, some of our offerings that we have at the archive. So first of all, I would just like to introduce Type West, which is a postgraduate certificate program in typeface design. And we also offer a ton of public workshops and lectures. So if that's something that you are interested in signing up for, feel free to get on our website and go on the education tab, and then you'll be able to find out more information. So the exhibition that we have on view in our gallery right now that some folks in person might have walked by as they came into our reading room is Typographic Jazz, the monoprints of Jack Stoffaker. And this show is a sort of retrospective exhibition on Jack Stoffaker's work. He was a San Francisco-based printmaker and letterpress artist. And the works that are exhibited in this exhibition are kind of like never really seen before. There's some of his more experimental works that haven't been exhibited as much. So if you're in San Francisco, please come by and check out the exhibition. It's free on Thursdays, and then we're also open Fridays through Sundays for regular gallery hours. And then we have a member-only event, which is taking place online. It will be taking place on Zoom. So if you're interested in this, you're also welcome to sign up for memberships. And this event will be focusing on artist books and surprises. So if you are a member, these events are one of our best opportunities to explore the archive's permanent collection in more depth and also reflect on the work with fellow letter lovers. In this event specifically, we will be guiding you through artist books and other unexpected and inspiring objects from the collection. So feel free to sign up for memberships if you are interested in this. Next up, we have a workshop which will be taking place online called Coding Kinetic Type. And in this workshop, you will be learning how to use HTML, CSS, and variable fonts to create animated type in this hands-on experience. Next up, we have a letter form lecture, Type Revival for Period Film and Television with Leah Spencer, where she will be revealing her process of replicating period-appropriate typography for productions such as The Marvelous Miss Maisel. Next up, we have another online workshop coming up where you will be exploring the relationship between Arabic and Latin letter forms through a branding exercise guided by an experienced type designer. Finally, we have one more member nerd out coming up, which will be focusing on posters and digital type. And similar to the previous member nerd out that I had shared, it will be another opportunity for members to gather in the space, to commune, to learn about some specific aspects of the permanent collection, and also a chance to network and just kind of kiki with other members. So if that's something you're interested in, again, please sign up for a membership. Finally, if there is anything that I shared that you're interested in learning more about and signing up for, please log on to our website and go on to the events tab. And under that, you will be able to just kind of look over all our offerings in one space. Finally, I'd like to introduce the salon for which you're all gathered here today. Right before I hand it over to publishing folks, I would like to introduce Lucy Parker quickly. With nearly 15 years experience crafting best-selling books for the trade and gift markets, Lucy specializes in producing high-end design-driven books, often in collaboration with museums, such as the Exploratorium and the Walt Disney Family Museum, and magazines such as Popular Science. Lucy was formerly a senior editor at Weldon Owen Publishing, where she developed more than 20 art, lifestyle, and technology titles a year. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Lucy, who will be introducing Jennifer and Chris for the salon.
Thank you so much, Mikhail, and so wonderful to see everyone here. We're really excited for this great event. We are just over the moon to be publishing The Complete Commercial Artist, which is an overview of Japanese modernist design between 1928 and 1930. And you're going to hear a bunch about that from our author, Jennifer Weisenfeld, who we're very honored to be publishing, and our editor, Chris Westcott, who is up there with her today. Briefly, I just want to say a little bit about the mission of Letterform Archive and its publishing program. We are here to preserve and share our collection, which for the publishing team means preserving and sharing it in print, in pictures, and in words.
Can I pause you for a second? Our audio is coming through, so so the audience here couldn't hear it. Probably the audience online could. Do you want to go again, and I'll crank you up?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sorry for those who have to witness a take two of that. But yeah, just wanted to say how delighted we are to be publishing this beautiful book, The Complete Commercial Artist by Jennifer Weisenfeld, who is here with us today. Any better?
Yeah. Okay, fire away, Lucy.
Okay, great. Third time will be the charm, I hope, right?
We're maybe not getting the audio through here.
You know what I think is best at this juncture
huddle
to
around
do?
everyone.
Maybe she can just come in here.
Go to audio.
Okay, right. That would be me.
Or do you do audio directly on, like on Zoom, maybe?
The output is ARC. Yeah. Yep. Okay.
When I wear spotlighted.
There we go.
All right, testing. Any better?
No, that's the same.
Okay, well, how about we do this? I'm going to do my spiel afterward. I don't want to hold up the real main event here, which is listening to Jennifer and Chris talk about Complete Commercial Artist. So I'll see you all imminently up there in the room.
All right, great.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so more to come from Lucy and more thank yous to the publishing team, which I'll fill in my version of right now. A lot of hands went into the making of this book. And so in addition to Lucy's help, I want to shout out to Alice, who's out in the audience right now, who designed this beautiful book, Tom, who tuned all of the images, and there was a lot of incredible digital preservation work.
I can't hear you at all.
You can't hear me?
Yeah, you gotta talk
Yeah, okay,
Louder.
I'll speak a little bit louder, sorry. So there's a confusing like screen and people, and so apologies in advance if I'm toggling in one direction or the other. Yeah, and the rest of the publishing team as well. Also, Florence Fu, whose article on Complete Commercial Artist a few years ago really kind of kicked off the excitement around this incredible 24-volume set that you'll be hearing about today. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm personally delighted to be able to introduce Jennifer Weisenfeld, the author of this book, and to have worked with her on this book over the last year. It's a total pleasure. So with no further ado, Jennifer Weisenfeld is the Walter H. Annenberg Distinguished Professor of Art and Art History at Duke University. Her research explores modern and contemporary Japanese art history, design, and visual culture. The scope of Jennifer's work is really extensive, so I'm going to limit myself to a few words about her other books. Her first, titled Mavo, Japanese Artists and Avant-Garde, 1905 to 1931, tells the story of a remarkable group of artistic rebels and addresses the relationship between high art and mass culture in the aesthetic politics of 1920s Japan. Her second, Imaging Disaster, Tokyo and the Visual Culture of Japan's Great Earthquake of 1923, examines how visual media has shaped historical understanding of Japan's worst national disaster of the 20th century. And just last year, Jennifer published Gas Mask Nation, Visualizing Civil Air Defense in Wartime Japan, a book that ranges across a really dizzying array of sources to explore the anxious pleasures of visual culture during the Second World War. And I also would be remiss if I didn't mention her next project, which is due out from Duke University Press in 2025.
Correct.
The title of which is The Fine Art of Persuasion, Corporate Advertising Design, Nation, and Empire in Modern Japan. I already have it in my cart. Encountering Jennifer's work for the first time in her book on Mavo was in some ways a lot like an experience I have over and over again at the archive. Whoa, there's a whole archive of material I knew nothing about. So much to look at. What are these things? What does it even mean? Jennifer's talent for showing us things that we otherwise might not have seen, especially if our eyes have been trained on Europe or the US, is only matched by her generous enthusiasm for tuning us in to the things that they have to tell us. It's why I feel so lucky to have worked on this project with her and why I'm excited to have her here to speak with us today. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Jennifer Weisenfeld.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh,
All right, the document camera is live.
okay.
So yeah, I thought I would just ask you to begin by telling us a little bit about what is this thing? This is, of course, the book that we published, but maybe we should start with the object itself.
Yes. And first, I would just like to also express my gratitude for working with you, Chris, and with Lucy, because this was and the designers who produced this incredible book. It's just stunning. And it's nice to work with people who appreciate images and design when you're doing this kind of project. So it was a great labor of love for me too. But yes, absolutely. What is this thing? Because it's an object. It's a series of objects. And as you can see, we've tried to capture some of the design aesthetics of it, but it's a compendium of 24 volumes, which were issued in both hardcover and softcover by subscription over 2 years, from 1928 to 1930. And so you're seeing here that Chris's opening is the hardcover version. It had, most of the issues had about 150 pages to them, of which a third or so were images. And then what's extraordinary about this, it is an encyclopedia, almost a time capsule of global design at this time period, seen through the lens of Japanese designers. And so it's such an extraordinary, both, I also, when I first saw it, was just blown away by the kinds of images and this cornucopia of source material that was here. And so you can really see, it was a hard task to even select images out of this. And hopefully, one of the things that the letter form archive will do is to make the entire digital version of this available down the road. So this could be a great springboard for research. But you can see that we have the hardcover, the soft cover, and then of course the soft cover came in a slipcase. And there was a lot of photography of in situ design as well as original designs. Over 70 individuals contributed to this. So it's kind of, again, a snapshot of some of the people who were working behind the scenes during this time period, whose names we don't know, some of whom we do know, who are well known, and others who we don't know. So it helps us really understand an emerging network of professional designers during this time period, many of whom worked for companies also that we know, that have been in business for over 100 years. So it's just extraordinary. And it's not just a picture book, it's annotated with extensive essays from the perspective of experts, actually anatomizing and taking apart all of the different kinds of design that were taking place, analyzing it from the perspective of practitioners, from business historians, from people in all different walks of the design field, and really kind of taking it apart down to the nitty-gritty, which is really absolutely fascinating. So, and I mentioned that it's a collection of objects. So it's not only 24 volumes, soft cover, hardcover, slip cases, but also each issue had a gazette in it, a getbo. And this really interesting addition was a kind of update on what was going on, a response from subscribers and readers. And we get a little bit of a sense of a dialogue between the people who are reading this and using it. And then also just updates on people and members and various kinds of things. So it's very much a real-time kind of conversation that it's having. So we have the whole set of those as well, one in each volume that was issued. I mentioned this was subscription. So you would pay 1 yen for the soft cover or 1.5 for the hardcover version. And then you would subscribe to all 24 volumes of it. And then they would come. One thing that we found, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but is that they were not issued in order, in sequence. When we started to look into the dates, we realized it was not issued 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was actually issued probably based on when they completed each volume, and so it's not necessarily a narrative arc of what was prioritized 1 to 24. But what you're seeing here on the screen is another incredible find, and I really admire your sleuthing to get these objects. This was a poster, a prelude to advertising, publicity for publicity, and showing what you could expect if you purchased this. It's a poster that would have folded out and been tucked in. It shows some of the themes of the various volumes as well. So lots of really great different kinds of parts of this that show its materiality and its historical totality. And then you can see the book itself here, the introductory essay that I authored. And then we have a volume on each. We have a chapter on each volume talking about it, kind of a nutshell look at it, and then some selected images with the original captions so that you can see that. Even trying to do the numbering, the page numbering was challenging because each volume had 3 different, it renumbered itself over and over again. So it's a little bit, it had its own logic, but we've tried to capture its, its essences.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think we'll switch now to from the document camera to the slide presentation.
One other thing I wanted to mention, are we still on Spotlight or?
Oh, do you want to go back to the?
No, not to the.
Oh yeah,
that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. No, one other thing I wanted to mention while we're pulling up the slides is that not only was this a subscription product, but also that it was marketed to companies and retail stores during this time period throughout Japan. And it was primarily sold to printers, to design schools, to companies, to retail shops. And you see the hardcover here, the soft cover on the right, and then the slipcase in the middle. And you can see how the designers have really picked up on the aesthetics of the original here. But it was also marketed throughout the empire. And one thing that people often don't know is Japan was a burgeoning empire in the early 20th century. So by 1928 or 30, you would have had retail shops that would have been in Taiwan, in Korea, and then by 1930s in Manchuria and North China. So in some ways, this is a regional work that was extending marketing throughout the Japanese empire.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about when you first encountered this, what got your interest going about this 24-volume work?
Yeah, so you mentioned Mavo. Should we go to the next slide? My dissertation and my first book was on this, as you mentioned, rebellious group of avant-garde designers who were active right around 1923 to 1925. And it was in the course of looking at their graphic design, one of their main missions was to kind of break down the boundaries between art and daily life, and to bring more of the commercial sphere, more of mass culture, more into the realm of fine art. And so graphic design was a big aspect of that. And they published, you see the cover of that book, which, by the way, is open access. So if anybody's interested in looking at it, it's available on the Internet Archive. But they also published this, as you can see, very kind of avant-garde magazine, which was part of a kind of global and cosmopolitan world of small magazines during this time period. And lo and behold, the artists who were involved with this, including the main impresario of Mavo, this guy Murayama Tomoyoshi, was actually a contributor to The Complete Commercial Artist. And he was, as you can see here, a very whimsical designer. He did a lot of different kinds of images. And you can see I don't know if you can see his signature here, Tom, that's down here.
Sorry.
Tom for Tomoyoshi. And actually later on, his son actually started a gallery called Gallery Tom in his name. And after finding that he was so active and so many of the Mavo artists were active in commercial design and in this compendium, I discovered the main person who was behind it, which was Hamada Masuji. And Hamada Masuji is really the impresario, the architect of this project. He was one of 6 editors for it originally, but in terms of his contributions and in terms of the overarching vision of this entire project, he is clearly the absolute guiding voice. And in fact, it was his mission to create this. And the thing that's so interesting about him is, as you can see, is not only he was a practitioner, he was a theorist, but he really was an entrepreneur. He was a design entrepreneur and critic who was trying to establish commercial art in Japan as a legitimate professional category. And to do that, he had to name it, he had to institutionalize it, he had to standardize it, he had to produce it in a sense. And of course, he did it with this very robust group of individuals who we see coming through. But what's so amazing is, so he forms.
Presenter view.
Oh, they can see presenter view?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. They're seeing the whole thing. So first thing he did was he translated the term commercial art into Japanese, this term Shogyo Bijutsu. This was not a term that had existed before. It's a neologism. It's a newly created term to identify a newly emerging category. And I think what many people forget is that this was also a realm that was emerging around the world during this time. People were defining graphic design. They were creating new terms to create a new professional field. And so he's the one who coined the Japanese translation of commercial art as Shogyo Bijutsu, which became pretty much standard in dictionaries by 1932. He coined it in 1926. And then he formed a group called the Commercial Artists Association, CAA. And you'll see those little CAAs popping up throughout the compendium. It's a lot of, again, self-reflexive publicity for the group. He was, if anything, not just an entrepreneur, but a self-promoter in the best sense of the word. And it took that kind of mission-driven work to get the field established. And that's really what the ultimate goal of this was.
So your essay describes really beautifully how important this volume was, and yet, I mean, when we first encountered it, and I think even in Japan, this material isn't so well known, or it's only just becoming well known. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about both of those things. Its importance and its moment, and also why we're just seeing it almost with fresh eyes today.
Yeah, why lost to history? That's absolutely right, and I think it's a question I've really struggled with, because it's clearly was very prominent in its time. It's an enormous effort with over 70 different contributors, obviously time, money, resources to put this together. The publisher was an important publisher during this time in the art sphere. So why is this not an area that's well known? And I think I've come to the conclusion that I think it's a post-war narrative of Japan's design ascension, that truly authentic design only started after the war. And when you look at the critics who were writing and the designers who were writing, even those who were active earlier and throughout the war, there's an investment in thinking about what is authentically Japanese and what is an authentic kind of modern Japanese design. And this time period was very cosmopolitan. It was global. That's one thing that you really see in this whole series. And this, as I mentioned, it's really a dialogue, a multinodal dialogue around the world, with Japan as a major node in that conversation, rather than this idea of maybe a transnational tradition that's picked up in the post-war period. And I do really believe that there's a kind of active essentializing desire in the post-war period after the war to identify that as true Japanese design and truly modern Japanese design. Whereas, it's harder to see what is truly Japanese during this time period. And so when you're looking at this and you're seeing that it looks like it's in conversation with French and German and Russian, but this is the nature of the 20s and 30s. It was a hybrid cosmopolitan moment. And that's what's very interesting to me, is to really see not Japan as essentialist and unique, but where it's in dialogue with the rest of the world during this time period and what it's bringing to that conversation. And this is really quite extraordinary, because there's nothing really like this in any other context. So that's something that I'm really interested in. And also thinking about design history. You mentioned the Euro-American kind of focus of design history. Well, Japan is always kind of portrayed as a recipient of this history, as a latent follower. But what we really see here is Japanese designers engaged in a real-time conversation on this media highway of trade journals, which you're seeing here. You're seeing Advertising World, Affiche. Those are both Japanese magazines in conversation with Gebrauchsgrafik, Die Reklame, Commercial Art, all of these global design magazines. And that to me is really interesting, because we're really seeing this as a network of exchange, and Japan's engaged in that in a very real time and important way, not just as a recipient. And so when you see the range of international design that's represented here, of course, Bauhaus, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, everything from around the world. It's just this incredible global cornucopia. It's incredible to see that, and then to see it analyzed and taken apart and compared, and what is useful, why are people doing these kinds of designs? Very, very interesting to see that. Ultimately, it shows a global entanglement during this time period that people don't really take they don't really, I think, give enough credit to. And that Japan particularly is, is often seen again as a recipient, but what we don't really look at is, like, for instance, Japonisme, which was an incredibly important turn of the century movement, of which woodblock prints, for instance, were a really important source. I jumped ahead on that, didn't I, with the image?
Great.
We have some images of that later on, so maybe I'll pause on the Japonisme. But one of the, sorry, you were going to say?
Oh, no.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, I would just add that, like, in working on this project, I feel like I've learned more about European, like, advertising history and also the avant-garde, as I have, working with other primary materials. There's just such a wealth of material, and in some ways, they were the great collaborators of this, like,
Yes.
European print culture. And then, yeah, also.
And also Russian as well, as
And
we're
Russian,
seeing
yeah,
here. And
yeah, and American, yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
So I think it just points to that kind of, again, that really global cosmopolitan movement of, and is certainly of the circulation of typographies and new forms of mechanical production, printing, all of those things you're really seeing at this kind of heady moment that's being represented here.
Mhm. So you talked a little bit about the idea of the commercial artist, and how this was kind of being born in this moment. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about how the volumes portray that figure, or sort of, yeah, give shape to what a commercial artist is.
Well, as I mentioned, for Hamada, this was a mission-driven project, and this wasn't an established field. It required standardization. It required thinking about the full range of publicity types. And that's one thing that just actually blew my mind when I saw these volumes, was the capacious nature of design at this time. This is not just graphic design. This is, of course, typography, editorial design, posters, but it's show windows, it's packaging, it's neon signage, it's wrapping paper, newspapers, monograms, and logos and brand designs, posters in every form imaginable, as well as electric lighting and all the new technologies that were coming out that were changing display. The show windows were incredible, and they just really sort of drew me in to think about that this new area of design was really about transforming urban space and transforming and spectacularizing the commodity to some extent. And so many of these, as I mentioned, so many of these companies that the Japanese designers were working for are 100-year-old companies, and they have been around precisely because they were able to capitalize and maximize on the value of advertising and advertising design. The view of commercial art that we get from this is that companies, you're seeing here examples of Shiseido, Jintan, Calpis, all of the different logos for different companies that people might be, Yamasa show you, the soy sauce company, department stores. These are all modern businesses that are formed right around the turn of the century. Some of them have roots earlier, but they are setting up in-house design divisions, hiring newly trained designers who are going to new academies. Most of the design schools are being established right around this time, and they are being educated in how to work in this new commercial sphere that is existing. So the companies are absolutely crucial in promoting and establishing commercial design during this time period. In fact, it's stunning to see how many of the presidents of these companies are writing copy and are engaged in brand definition. They're really, again, entrepreneurial, but also thinking about ways to create new products like chocolates and caramels. And Calpis was a lactic drink. Obviously, Jintan's a breath freshener that has medicinal qualities. Shiseido's cosmetics. all different kinds of products during this time. So the company history is really, really interesting. Another set of images that that really show this kind of cornucopia of advertising forms, of design forms that are featured here. One of the things that comes up is not just graphic designs, but ways in which signage and decorations for the fronts of buildings and the way it kind of projects out into space. You might have wayfinders and other kinds of really elaborate signage that enlivens the cityscape in a sense. And then, of course, all kinds of typographies, modern, very whimsical typographies, letter forms, most of them hand rendered. All kinds of interesting things. And then display designs from props down to the props and how you're showing things to glass windows, vitrines, everything from the ground really on up. You can see how colorful it is and all of the things that stand out.
So you mentioned Art Nouveau too.
I did, and I jumped ahead to Art Nouveau, but I really wanted to bring this up and to talk about Japanism just for a second, because again, it goes back to this global moment, and it's not just suddenly Japan is engaged in a discourse and in a dialogue with the globe at 1928 to 30, but they've been engaged in it for a long time. And through Japanism, and many people in the design world know this, really as the kind of Euro-American fascination with Japanese woodblock prints and decorative arts. But that fascination gets funneled into a whole range of decorative arts and graphic design movements. And then the Japanese designers who go, say, to Paris, see again the Japanese tendencies in some of the work, and they kind of absorb again something that they've seen that's very familiar. So it's kind of almost like a parallax back and forth of interest. That's it's a kind of constant recalibration and interest in this. And I just show you some examples by Sugiura Hisui here, who I think he's the great example of a Japanese Art Nouveau designer. He was the principal designer for Mitsukoshi department store, which again, still exists now. Featuring this modern woman sitting in a modern interior, holding the Mitsukoshi magazine on her, it's the, the catalog for the department store on her lap. And you can see also another piece that he did for an exposition of oceanic cultures on the right with this mermaid. And then so just some images of post-impressionism and all of the modernist movements. When you think of impressionism, post-impressionism, not just Art Nouveau, of course, that were influenced deeply by Japanese woodblock prints and Japanese design. Where you have Sugiura Hisui going to Paris in 1900, he's seeing this at the World Exposition in Paris, comes back and is reinterpreting this kind of Japanese vision into his own, and then becomes probably one of the most important designers of the early 20th century. He lived a very long time and also became a founding president of the Tama Art University. So that was also the connection between businesses, educators, pedagogy, and well, in the state, because he also worked for the Tobacco Commission, is really very clear through if you look at these networks. Yeah, and I just wanted to show some of these examples again from the complete commercial artist. It's hard to pick out just some images, but sometimes they have these double spreads that really show you the ways in which they're thinking about this global comparison, looking at Parisian magazines and cultural magazines and Japanese magazines next to each other, and kind of thinking about that dialogue that's going on, this simultaneity of global design that's happening during this time period.
Yeah, well, so this is a picture of the contents page. And I think we wanted to include this just to show again the breadth of material that's here, and everything from letter forms to show windows. And here's yeah, a close up of one of those
Yeah.
show windows.
I particularly love that show window when we were looking at it, because it really gives you a feel, it's very meta, because it gives you a feel not only of the tableau vivant of the show window itself, but it's the city. And you see the way the city is reflected and the urban environment, these new highly urbanized environments like Tokyo, but Osaka, Nagoya are so important for the emergence of modern design. That's where you get the streetscapes and the retail environments that they're going to have this, and the big department stores that have the large show windows. So this is a show window showing the urban environment. And just to give you a sense, many people don't really have a feel for what Tokyo might have looked like in 1928 or 30. It was really a vibrant cityscape of which the facades of the buildings were promotional signboards. There's lots of text and imagery here. You're seeing cars and different kinds of vehicles that had publicity on them, large scale buildings. This small image on the upper right, I particularly love because it shows some of those street sales decorations that you see where you just get these kiosks and standalone entryways. Some of them are wayfinders where you see hands going like, look here, come inside. There are ways of getting pedestrians off the street to come inside and to look at businesses. So they're really animated, they're spectacularized, and they're enlivening the street in this incredible way.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a little bit more about like if you could tell us about the changes that were going on in the urban sphere. It seems like also new consumer types and so on that you start to see kind of coming through the pages of commercial artists.
Yes. I mean, one thing we saw with these images is one is the new technologies. Even one of the signboards before said radio, you might have noticed that. There's not only huge transformations in Japan in terms of urbanization, much more widespread literacy, magazines, mass culture, wireless, all these new technologies that you would think of as developing across the world, but that changes lifestyles. And one of the things that modern businesses do is they create the idea of new kinds of consumers. And of course, new jobs create new kinds of consumers as well. So you might have salarymen, what Japanese people would call, businessmen or salarymen in suits who go to offices. And you might have modern housewives, or one of the slogans for this time period was good wife, wise mother. So you have a new concept of motherhood and new concept of being a wife in much more nuclear or multi-generational families. And those consumers, and you have the modern girl, she's the equivalent of the flapper, and the modern boy who's a kind of dandified, he's got his Panama hat on, he's very dapper. They're a couple new kinds of romantic couples that you would see here. And I just particularly love this image of this almost flapper era cafe denizen here. She's dangling a cat from her arm, the dancing top hats, this new sportsman, this idea of modern sports. When you get modern universities, you start to have sports teams, and you get this idea of kind of what the modern sportsman might be doing track and field. Baseball is very popular, still enormously popular. These are all modern consumer types, and they're represented in here. And I particularly love this image of the top hats, of the Panama hats here with the walking, I don't know if he's a modern boy or if he's a salaryman, but he's dapper, and they're all walking in this. And that's a show window design, a mock-up for a show window design that you would see in one of the department store windows. So it's an incredible, it's a window on a window into the cultural transformations of this time period, and really getting a feel for either real consumer types or aspirational consumer types. Mm-hmm.
So you really get a picture of the new modern types. What about the past and sort of the aesthetic cultures of Japan that they were inheriting, kind of reworking?
Yeah, and you can never go wrong with the beautiful woman. The bijinga, which is the really the standard for motifs for Japanese design all the way through print culture. And that's something that continues to be very important for print culture here, whether she is a kimono clad beauty, or she may be a flapper era moga, or she can be something in between. She's fanciful, she's wearing new kinds of cosmetics, and she's seductive, certainly. So lots of continuity of focus on women and women's bodies, but also newly liberated women too, and as consumers themselves, not just within the household, very important. So you really see that just in these kind of images here, how she's abstracted, how she's objectified in these images. But also, do we have another one of some of the previous? Yes. The roots of Japanese advertising and publicity forms, some of them go back centuries. And we would be mistaken if we thought that advertising was something that was a modern phenomenon. In fact, Japan, particularly in the Edo period under Tokugawa shogunal rule, had a kind of proto-capitalism that was very very modern and very centered on commodities, and had a lot of promotional forms, many of which continue on. And what's so extraordinary about this volume, about this compendium, is it has a whole volume just on Japanese taste, meaning types of designs that have been carried over and have relevance still, and analysis of that from the perspective of the late 1920s. What of Japanese tradition is valuable for contemporary designers? What does it connote? Why should we use it? Why is graphic design so associated with, and particularly printmaking, so associated with Japan? That's another thing that people are clearly very cognizant of, and are actually debating in the essays in this series. It really gives you an insight into what the issues of identity are during this time period. So you're seeing here on the screen, you're seeing examples of handbills, or different kinds of leaflets, which were very common, signboards, kanban. Kanban were the bread and butter of advertising, and they were so diverse and widespread throughout the Tokugawa period. I mean, I love the one that's shaped like an octopus. Some of them are shaped like the goods that they sell. You have all kinds of different signboards that were produced, and these are pre-existing types of advertising. There were also celebrity endorsements. You could have kabuki actors who were endorsing products during this time period. You have a gazetteer on the right. It's actually what would have been like a ranking guide for kabuki actors or sumo wrestlers, which were mass printed, because this is a time of mass printing, but not machine printing, hand woodblock printed. All the typographies and varieties of typographies that would have been used during this, or not typographies, letter forms, woodblock printed letter forms. You would have had curtains. Some of you may have seen noren curtains in Japanese restaurants now. Well, those go back for decades. You would also have them in front of businesses. You could have moncho, which are basically like brand logos for households, and were used as crests for both businesses and households for centuries. So there's lots of roots in earlier forms of advertising and publicity that come from the earlier time period. But I think what's so crucial to remember during this is that this is not a transhistorical process. This is not that these are all just floating and continuing on. People are actively writing and choosing what makes sense in the modern period, what connotes a Japanese product, what would be better, how to choreograph and orchestrate letter forms that mean different things. So it's almost a time when Japanese taste becomes reified. And the fact that you could have a whole volume on Japanese taste in relation to a kind of global encyclopedia tells us that there's a self-reflexivity during this time period about design and about one's own history. And that's, to me, really important, is to understand that it's not transhistorical, it's historicized. And those things, there are agents who are actively carrying that over.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about the character design, since they're picking up on these so much in this work, and there's also an entire volume dedicated to
Letters.
letter design, yeah.
Mhm.
But it's really across all the volumes.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
well,
this is seasonality.
let's talk about seasonality.
Yes, okay,
first.
we have to talk about seasonality first. Another really important carryover in publicity practices is the importance of yearly events, annual events, and seasonality, meaning the 4 seasons. And you can imagine different clothes in spring, different hats in summer, different objects and goods. So it's a really important constant seasonal cycle for marketing is really important, as it was important for events throughout the calendar prior to this. But also the zodiac symbols. I particularly love these images of the Chinese zodiacs, Year of the Dragon this year, but those symbols are also really important for marketing each year of the zodiac. And since we just passed March 1st, which is the Hinamatsuri, the Girls' Doll Festival, all of the festivals for girls and boys, each one of those is an opportunity to sell new goods in different, key to those different events, including New Year's. New Year's is a very important holiday. And the Western New Year versus the Lunar New Year is important. But so you see all the 4 seasons, you see the zodiac here, and this image that's kind of almost monochrome here shows a display of how you show the dolls for the girls festival, which I have to say is very sentimental to me because it's my daughter's birthday, March 1st. So, you can see it's broken down into all its constituent elements. That's the other thing about these illustrations is they're how-to illustrations. This is a guidebook on how to do these kinds of things as well. They're broken down into diagrammatic, schematic ways, which really shows us that there was a market for learning how to do design during this time period. And this is really important. Yeah.
Okay, letter.
Yeah, letter forms. Okay. And this is, of course, the dedicated area of this archive here. I'm going to give you the brief version of this, but Japanese is a very complicated language with many different kinds of writing systems, of which you have kanji that you see here, which are Chinese-based characters, but it has 2 syllabaries to it. Hiragana and katakana. Mostly katakana was a notational or diacritical, but now represents mostly foreign imported words. So if I say computer, computa, it would be written in katakana. And then romanization, romanized letters. So you're seeing the same term for commercial art here, Shogyo Bijutsu, written in 4 different letter forms, 4 different scripts, including pictographs, ideographs, and all of those can be used in Japanese design, and how they're orchestrated and keyed to different kinds of products. They can be used in all different kinds of ways. So it is itself a kind of metaverse of communication. And then you're seeing some examples here of different kinds of scripts that were used. Obviously, you have long calligraphic tradition, and so some letter forms are based on calligraphies, but you also have seal scripts and things that were carved and then printed. Here, you have ones like the peony design that look like the peony flower, others that were associated particularly with sumo or theater. You can see the images on the far right that have a kind of brushy quality to them. How do you express brushiness in something that's not done by a brush? Well, you can create those kind of brush-like qualities. Really, it's just such a broad field of so many different ways that you can communicate different kinds of context, different kinds of, whether it's maybe something that's trying to connote something old versus something modern and new. Maybe we can show and then you get the modern letter forms that are just whimsical and playful and abstract, taking kanji, the characters, and some of the syllabaries, and using them almost like plastic art forms, or like the characters on the right. This is for Akadama port wine, the red ball. It was a kind of fortified wine that was sold, I think it was by Suntory, actually. And you see the character for red, Aka, and he's just a little guy, and he's holding the character for Dama in his hand, and he's smoking, and he's sitting, and he's doing all of these things. So you get these characters that are already pictorialized being made anthropomorphized into the consumer himself. And we can see that with all range of things, that you can abstract the images almost to the point where they're hard to read. I mean, some of these modern characters can be tough to read. And these, I really like, force Chris to put this one in because I just love this so much. It's particularly, I don't know if you can see these images. This is the characters for soap, and it's got all these little bubbles coming up over it. There's so much playing between the pictorial and the literary, the literal meaning of these words, or you can have, what are the other things, like clocks, and there's just this kind of abstraction of all these types of images here. So and this is again just a sampler. It's a sampler of ways you can think about these types of characters. And you can imagine if you're running a small retail store, you don't have any in-house design. How wonderful would it be to have 24 volumes of ideas for the next decade to play with? And I think that's really how it was received.
So clearly you love the letter form volume.
I love the letter form volumes, yes.
Yeah. Are there other favorite volumes or sort of standouts that you here, for instance?
Yeah, it's very much a competition between the letter forms and the show windows for me. The show windows and the displays in them they're just really revelatory, especially the textures, whether it's draping fabrics and this creating of all these rhythms like you see on the lower right, or a lot of these are things that would have been put in show windows to enhance commodity. So there's shelves and various ways that you could put various things in there and highlight them. Again, they all have placeholder terms in them, like Western style things, or whatever it is. So you would know if you were trying to put this kind of commodity, this might be a good kind of new electrical vitrine prop that you could put in here and adapt. But you can see the variety of these elements, very colorful, almost like a mosaic of different elements. And I mean, what's very interesting to me is this is the time when you're seeing the Bauhaus, for instance, playing with plastic arts and props and creating these scenarios and various kinds of stage designs. Similarly here, this is a theatrical stage design for the modern commodity. And it's just a few examples. There are so many here. And I particularly like these because it gives you a sense of both the promotional space inside the store and then outside the store, and the way it kind of draws you in again and has all of these kind of text, this three-dimensional text that enlivens the front of the building, even using just these three colors here. But very definitely you can see this resonance with other kinds of design.
So we asked you to write introductions for every single volume. And of course, there are, I think, 2,000 pages total in these things. So it's a lot of images to compute and recompute. I wonder if there were any things that really stood out to you as you were working on those introductions or looking at the volumes that struck you as new or surprising.
Well, one, I did mention the fact that after looking at this, I never realized until I actually looked at the back of them that they weren't issued in order. So that was kind of a revelation to me. But I think looking with you, we started to see all the Easter eggs that were in here. I wasn't even a term I was familiar with, which is all the ways in which Hamada started to put in his own organization. Every time we saw CAA, we knew that was the Commercial Artists Association. Or the Shogyo Bijutsu Zenshu, which is the Japanese title for the complete commercial artist, suddenly we saw, oh, there's a display for the sale of the complete commercial artist, which is also in this standalone, I don't know, it's like a kiosk kind of, no, what would you call it? Column. This columns were very popular during this time period to use in the street. And you see this kind of flag going through the column, and it says the complete commercial artist in it. And then these signs on the far left all have in them Arusu, which was the publisher, or Atelier, which was its sister publisher. And the publisher for this compendium, there were 4 brothers. One of them had this press, one had Atelier, one was a photographer, and the other one was a major poet. So this is a kind of cultural family, all of whom were very active. And you can see here, it says, I don't know if I can use the cursor, but Arusu here, Arusu toothpaste, Atelier here, and then over and over again. So we're just seeing this kind of self-reflexivity in the use of it, and it reference to itself, and a lot of CAA, a lot of Commercial Artists Association. Because as I said, Hamada this was not a foregone conclusion that commercial art was going to be established. It is in the process of being established. And that's what the compendium is really doing. It's establishing a field.
Yeah. Every time I look at it, it's something new. Yeah. So I have one more question, and then I'm going to open up to the room and also to the electric room. And that's just how working with this material has it shaped your further research? How's it shaped your thinking? What are you thinking about today?
Well, one, thank you for the opportunity to put all of these illustrations in, because one of the hardest things about working with anything in mass culture is having to select something to represent the hundreds of images. So just to have this out, to me, it's almost a great relief to know that it's there and I can speak to it. But I think one of the things that's just really interesting and important is to claim commercial art and the work of companies as important cultural production. And that's what the book that I'm putting out with Duke is really arguing, is that corporations were major producers of culture. And I know we tend to think very cynically about that, and we certainly can think about marketing in that way, but also we really have to take into consideration all the creative and innovative aspects of design that shaped modern experience and modernity, and that it's part of the visual culture. We can't separate it out. And to me, that was an incredibly important contribution to think about art and commerce together, to think about businesses as creative forces, motivated forces, certainly, in a capitalist society, but changing the nature of identity, consumer identity, as we saw. And the fact that these companies are still around, all of the companies, for over 100 years, shows the sustained impact and the way that they're known. Toshiba, Panasonic, Kirin, Shiseido, Kao, Morinaga, maybe not so well known, but there's a Morinaga, maybe you've had a Haichu, Morinaga. These are really important companies, and they are often left out of the conversation about art and the importance of cultural production because of a kind of aversion to thinking about commerce. And so to me, I think that's really a big revelation, and that's the culmination of 20 years of excavating company archives. And the fact is that Japanese companies value their histories. They saved everything, and the amount of archival material that's left in Japan, and the archivists and the professionalization of archiving business materials and publishing them is a testament to the fact that they believe that they are important players in the cultural landscape. And I think it's worth looking at that. It's really important.
Yeah. Oh, and that ambivalence about commercial design, commercial art, makes me think of the Hamada essay that we have partially translated at the end of the volumes too, which is on the one hand, like a sort of celebration of commerce and commercial art, and on the other hand is kind of like socialist Marxist, like sort of
I know.
utopian vision of a commercial future that's not capitalist.
They're right. The contradictions are there, absolutely. But I think if you understand what the horizon of the commercial world at this time as possibilities of breaking down boundaries, you can see it in a kind of liberatory way, the way that Hamada did, that he could bring that kind of leftist hopefulness into the commercial sphere and also see it as a way of recalibrating the high and low and bringing that more into balance. But it's interesting. It's this 100-page essay that's in the final volume is a manifesto, and you have to read it very carefully and parse it through, but you really get a sense of his vision. So thank you for having that translated, because it's important to have those primary documents there.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Well, I'd like to open the floor up now to questions. If anyone here in the audience has questions, or if there are any questions in the chat, I'm not sure if we've been collecting those, but now is your opportunity to drop
Something
them
in the back?
chat. Yeah.
First, I want to say thank you so much for making this incredible set of volumes more accessible. When Rob and I first came across it, we immediately thought, how can we help more people see this? Because even showing it in the archive is difficult because they're fragile and it's hard to get access to them.
Yeah.
So we were always thinking, how can we, bring this out to the public to, in a way that folks can actually have it in their home. So your work in helping make that digestible and understandable to a broad audience is super important. I'm really grateful for that. My question, and I apologize, it was a little bit late, so you may have answered early on, but I wonder how these were distributed worldwide, or if they were, and how many countries were, subscribed to them and receiving them, and what was the response outside of Japan?
Well, we don't have marketing data for a lot of these things, and of course, the publishers are defunct, but it seems to me that it was only marketed within Japan and the Japanese Empire, so colonial spaces as well, but primarily considered a domestic product for Japanese retailers. But what's so interesting is not just in the big cities, but also to smaller secondary and tertiary cities where you get a small urban center where they're trying to establish branch or chain store networks. Like Morinaga had a chain store network by its peak, 4,000 chain stores set up, extending all the way out to Manchuria, to Korea, Seoul, Taipei, all throughout the empire, but also throughout the nation. So in some ways, this kind of culture and these kinds of products are bringing together a national aesthetic and showing people things from the metropole or from the metropolitan centers and from around the world all across the country. So it has that unifying aspect to it as well, but I don't think it was marketed abroad. And it is primarily, everything is in Japanese. So the texts are all in Japanese. You could, of course, appreciate the images. But then it has migrated a little bit to some collections abroad, but most of the ones I've seen have been in Japan. Yeah.
We have some questions in the chat, so
Sure.
I can start with one of those, and then we'll get to more folks in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
From Charity Shi, we have, thank you so much for the Salon and book. It's hard for me to find good research on Japanese and Asian design and art history. Any recommended readings on how Western design has affected the formation of modern Japanese designs at different eras with different styles beyond avant-garde?
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of work on Japanism, and I do think there's quite a lot on that dialogic aspect of Japanism. So if you were to do some searches, there would be a lot there. But beyond avant-garde and modernist design, well, there's Nozomi Naoi's lovely book on Takahisa Yumeji, which is very interesting. I would say there's been, more and more, but the vast majority have been surveys and not kind of in-depth case studies or really looking. So there's still a lot to be done. Stay tuned, 2025, my book's coming out. Had to put that plug in. Yeah.
It's so interesting. I little bit confused about the basics. What was the role of the 100 companies with the publication? I mean, did they pay for it or?
The 100 companies. I'm not
the-
sure.
it said-
Contributors maybe.
Oh, the contributors?
Yeah.
Yes, so there were about 70 different contributors to this. And
Yeah, like Shishido and all those.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, those businesses.
right, so those companies, well, their work was just being spotlighted in this, and principally because a lot of the designers here were affiliated with a lot of those companies as well. So their work was seen as cutting edge during the time period. But in terms of subscription, people, the customers for this, the audience for this, those kinds of companies, but also smaller retail companies, retail shops that were becoming, say, chain stores or flagships representative of that particular brand. And so, for instance, if you were a Morinaga store, you could not sell Meiji chocolates. You know, you can't sell competitive brands. And so it's a little bit about creating this network. And Shiseido also had a major chain store that extended across the empire, chain store network as well. So it's almost a revolution in marketing as much as in design as well. In thinking about brand loyalty, in thinking about how to cultivate this unified corporate identity systems among all these retail stores. So they were interested in this, but the other places that were interested were printing companies. There are a lot of big printing, Toppan, Dai Nippon Insatsu, lots of printing companies, large and small, that are still around, Kyoto. And then, of course, schools. There were a lot of new design schools. Even the Tokyo School of the Arts instituted a new design section in, I think it was like 1927. So right before this came out, you start to get designers who are actually able to go to an imperial academy to learn how to do design as a professional category. And that, with these kinds of books, really contribute to the professionalization and standardization of the field. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
In the Zoom, we have another one from Sam Jian. What exactly are the characteristics of Art Deco in Japanese commercial type design, and what should I pay attention to when I'm designing?
Oh, that's not in my sphere, since I'm not a designer. Well, I would say that in Art Deco, you really see a machine aesthetic. Maybe we have some good examples. We didn't really pull out anything. We'll have to throw something online,
Right.
but machine aesthetic, streamlined designs, things that are highly geometricized, and let's see, what other kinds of elements that would be well, metallic, you know, new materials, metals, glass, things that look like modern technology that kind of speak to that. A lot of the deco in Japanese design, you really see in ocean liners and hotels and all of these kinds of, and trains and all different kinds of new, yeah, maybe that actually, I think
Yeah.
this image on the far right is probably the closest among the examples that we have here. One thing I should say is this compendium does not advocate for one style or one type of design at all. It is a plurality. It is asserting most, and both in Japanese taste and in a global taste, pan-European and American. It is basically saying this is the landscape of design, and not trying to advocate for one particular style. But it's no doubt that it came out 1925 was the great Parisian exposition that kind of heralded the appearance of Art Deco. So it comes right on the heels of that emergence of that. And it's kind of this streamlined, geometricized abstraction using machine-like forms and modern materials. And so you kind of see that in this display here, because you have glass, you have metallic-like surfaces. This actually is an example of something using electricity. And there's a whole volume on electric design here, which is, you know, really modern. And Edison, again, was the consummate showman. And going back to the connection to companies that you asked about, I never realized that Edison was the was a 51% owner of the precursor of Toshiba. So there's a huge connection between American companies too during this time period. You know. I don't know if I answered. I don't know what to say about how to design. I can't answer that question.
You heard of Type West?
Yeah, Type West, come to the letterform. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if they were like traditionalists that maybe didn't like the idea of this revolution in design. What were some of the obstacles that they went through to kind of convince maybe that this was the path to kind of go forward?
That's a great question. I think what you find though is that the vast majority of people who are doing what we would think of as this kind of design that before the commercial art movement considered themselves artisans, and they had an artisanal tradition working, and they were doing a lot of different things. They were doing maybe textiles and ceramics, and they were sign makers, they were tatami makers. They're part of an artisanal tradition. And so those traditions do continue on. There's still tons of sign makers, lantern makers, tatami makers there. In fact, Japan has probably one of the most robust craft traditions in the world. And some of those people are recognized now as national treasures. So it continues on a kind of craft and artisanal level. But these are people who are working for modern corporations and are really thinking about modernity itself and about new consumer markets. So in some ways they're parallel, but they do meet. And they meet in terms of certain commodities like sake, for instance. What do you do with modern sake? You know, it's associated with centuries of production, and we might use a calligraph. If I'm making hakutsuru or I'm making gekkeikan, I might use something more traditional looking to connote a Japanese type of product, or traditional Japanese sweets, for instance, wagashi. So what we start to see, and this is what I was talking about the Japanese taste volume, is you start to see those agents of design thinking about choreographing and orchestrating types for different types of products. What is a Japanese product? What's a Western style product? How do we, and then maybe oscillating back and forth, trying to figure out what appeals to consumers to do that. And we see that with soy sauce or some of the other products as well. Sometimes they have modern things, or Mitsukoshi. Mitsukoshi was a modern department store, but it had a long prehistory with Echigoya, which was a kimono store that was established in the 17th century. So it does have a long history. And so their logo is both modern, but also uses characters. They're kind of doing a duality. And this is the great challenge of modern Asia, which is trying to figure out how to maintain certain traditions, but also stay up to date. The one area that I did find a lot of people really focusing on was woodblock prints. And particularly in the 30s and 40s, and then again in the 50s and 60s when the occupation forces are there and they realize occupation soldiers love Japanese prints again, is that's what people associate with Japan. Let's not lose that, because that's what Japan is really well known for. And so there's a lot of discussion about this. How can we market this? How can we make this woodblock prints something distinctive and make that still keep up with it? Because it's right at the moment where woodblock prints are no longer a popular culture medium. They're becoming an art medium, and they're shifting over. But it's still very important for, and there are some designers who really make their personal style very much a woodblock kind of aesthetic to stand out doing that. But it's, you know, it's really a complicated question. It's a great question though.
We have a couple more in the Zoom as well. Sarah Getz is wondering if you thought that the modular type in volume 15 was actively used.
The modular type, which one?
All right, here we go.
All right, let's pull it out. I'd like to say I've committed everything to memory, but.
All right, for instance, this isn't the best example.
Oh, yeah.
We'd show some other, yeah, but for
So we're gonna
instance.
go under the dock camera.
Oh, yeah, you want to
So
put that under the
folks
dock
can look at
camera?
it.
Try.
Okay,
See if there's also this piece in your
yeah.
essay.
Oh,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Oh, yes. So there's, not only is there a great variety of letter forms in here, but each letter
Oh,
form,
it's not showing up on the TV. I think you have to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, I can do that.
Okay. Is there these grids that take apart all of the individual letters to show how they can be broken down and schematized? And again, it's part of the how-to diagrammatic aspect of it. You can see that here. We see that in a lot of places where the characters are kind of shown in a grid, shown the proportions of them. And these are actually, I think most of those are syllabaries. They're not actually characters. And when I say syllabaries, I mean like A, B, C, D, kakikukeko, they're sounds. They're not pictographs. They're not ideographs like a kanji. They're just an alphabet, but they're syllables. So it's a consonant with a vowel in it. And so what you're seeing here is you're seeing no, and the hiragana for no, and it's in a gridded box showing you what the proportion and composition of that is. So it's a very scientific almost pedagogy about how to think about the weight and disposition of letter forms. And we see a whole variety of these used throughout, a lot of them. But I think what's interesting is that approach to letter forms is really interesting because it's showing this attempt to systematize and standardize approaches so you can understand this wild, wild west of letters. That's crazy. The other thing is Japanese can be written top to bottom. It can be written right to left to right. During this time period, it wasn't standardized. So even when you were picking which direction the type was going could convey something about the product and about the meaning of it. Here you're seeing one character, the character Furaku, written in a variety of different styles. And you can just see this kind of playing around with it, making orthogonals more wavy and more expressive. I particularly love the example on the right because you see the character for winter here, and it's very chilly. It's got ice on it. Or you see here, I don't know if you can see this, but shashin, the character for the compound for photograph, and it looks like a bellows for a camera. Those are very pictographic. Or here, these are, I love them. The amount of playfulness with teeth is off the charts. So this is hamigaki, toothpaste, and they've got teeth inside. You know, you can really see it because the character itself is a pictograph of teeth. And then you play on the pictographic aspect and you repictorialize the teeth in it. There's a lot of playing around with teeth.
Easter eggs and teeth. Yeah.
Yes, lots of teeth. You can see, and then of course this one up on the top is for a hair salon, and you see the wavy hair coming off of it. Lots of really interesting playfulness here. You could go down this rabbit hole for a long time. Yeah.
Curious, but once these volumes went out, I know they were within the Japanese empire, but did it influence other neighboring countries? Like, did you find did other countries adopt this strategy virtually, or was it just sort of?
Yeah, I don't know, because this is a compilation of things from around the world, and we can see that there were commercial art. Gebrauchsgrafik was a German magazine, was gathering from at least pan-European and did have some special spotlights on Japan. So there is an interest among the world in doing this. And then there are all of these world expositions where you're having commercial art being shown, like the Paris Exposition 1937, very big venue for world posters. So there's a lot that's being circulated, not just among these. There's all kinds of publications, and that's why I think of it as a kind of transnational media highway, of which all these trade journals are in conversation with each other and are seeing and basically reproducing with impunity each other's things, because copyright is kind of fungible at this time. And that's really important for understanding that circulation. The editor for Gebrauchsgrafik was very important as being a nexus for global design around the world. And he's in constant contact with some of, like, the editor of Advertising Age Kokokukai, which I showed earlier. Hamada knew a lot of these people as well. They're really in conversation with each other. So whether this particular compendium was that, it itself represents that transnational global dialogue is, I think, is how I would see it. And the fact that they could get access to this much material and photographs, and I mean, it just shows that they had this at their fingertips to be able to publish that. That really is a testament to how much was circulating during that time period. And people are moving, they're moving around. Yeah.
In the Zoom, we have from an anonymous attendee.
Mhm.
Is Japanese commercial art and design well documented in Japan in the way that it is in the US?
I think there are some dedicated design history scholars, Tajima Natsuko, who did the annotations. I should mention that the Complete Commercial Artist was issued in 2001 as a facsimile by Yumani Shobo. But unfortunately, they issued it in a miniature version. So it's not really a facsimile, and it's really more valuable, I think, for the texts and the various things, because Tajima includes all of the statistics about it, who contributed, what issues, and also all the gazettes. She reproduces all the gazettes, which is very valuable because, you know, it's hard to find them. Even when you find these issues in a used bookstore, they don't always have the things that were tucked into them originally. So that facsimile is available, and we do have that. What was the question again?
It was kind of a broad question regarding whether this kind of commercial work is
well documented. Yeah. There have been some fantastic exhibitions, and mostly I would say they're descriptive exhibitions and surveys, not as much discussion about, well, one, the companies that produced this. It's always in a kind of art context, I think, which I think is a mistake, because you really have to understand the economic systems that produce this. But Shiseido has their own gallery, and they produce a lot of fantastic exhibitions. They had a big exhibition at NYU. A lot of these companies have their own scholarship about it, but again, they don't really work on design history, and they don't look at the global aspect. They're interested in the history of production. Say, you know, Kao is interested in its revolutions in soap and all of the products that it produced, which is absolutely fascinating, but very different. So I guess, no, nothing that's holistic, that to me anyway, I think approaches this in the contextualized, historicized way that I would approach it. But I'm an art historian, so, and you know, design history in the US is really not that well developed. It's the UK that's really the center of design history, I would say, now, and there's not a lot of design history still in the US.
One more in the Zoom from Anne, asking, what was the print run of the compendium?
Well, that's hard to know. We don't really know. We tried. We have tried to figure it out. We don't know. And we don't even know if they published every issue to the same amount as all of them. We just don't know. No marketing data, no archives for this publisher.
We do know that they really wanted people to buy the set.
Yes.
And not just one at a time. So
Yes.
this poster that you showed just a moment ago is really emphasizing that you can't get it just one at a time. You have to get the set.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And another aspect of this material object that I forgot to mention is that they also had a teaser where they had a sample book that showed you what some of it would look like. And the Letterform Archive was able to acquire one of those sample books. I had never seen it before. So that was a huge revelation to me. I'd never seen that.
And all of that book is viewable on the online archive right now. So if you head over there, you can see a sampler of
A sample of the sample of the samples. Yes. But sorry, we don't have that marketing or publishing data. We don't. So we have to assume they are to be found, and I know of a number of sets of them, and I've seen lots of them, as they say, bara individual ones in Japanese flea markets and used bookstores. So they're definitely out there. but I don't know how many were issued.
How are we for time?
We're exactly at time,
Right.
exactly out of
The
question.
State of the Union is wrapping up.
Yes,
everyone,
sorry I had to
so-
compete with the president, but hopefully it was worth it.
Yeah, Lucy, do you want to say anything about the book program or can we wrap? All right.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We love this book. We're so honored to
thank you
Yeah,
so much.
really.
It's been a great gift to work with all of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye, everybody.